Some wounds never heal. They just scab over. You learn to live with the ache, like an old broken bone that predicts the rain. I still wake up some nights in a cold sweat, thinking I'm back in that house with him before I realize I'm safe in my own bed, 70 years away from that terrified little girl. My name is Mabel Ruth Callaway. I'm 76 years old now, living in a small house in Tennessee with a front porch where I rock and watch the seasons change. Most folks around here just see a sweet old lady with silver hair who bakes cookies for her grandkids. They don't know the hell I walked through to get here. They don't know what it's like to have your childhood stolen on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was born in 1948 in a tiny speck of a town in northern Alabama, so small it barely had a name, just a crossroads with a general store, a Baptist church, and scattered farms stretching out between creeks and holler. We lived in a shotgun house. You could fire a shotgun through the front door and the bullet would go clean out the back without hitting a wall. 5 rooms strung together like beads filled with 8 children and 2 tired parents. Daddy worked the fields, sharecropping cotton mostly. Some years were better than others, but none were ever good. Mama kept the house and us children in line with a wooden spoon and Bible verses. I was the eldest girl, which meant I was Mama's right hand by the time I could walk steady. Before I was 10, I could cook a full breakfast, mind 4 younger siblings, wash clothes in the creek, and still get chores done before sundown. School was a luxury I only got in snatches. The nearest school was 3 Emma away, and during planting and harvest, Daddy needed every pair of hands in the fields. I'd catch a few months in winter when the ground was too hard for farming, enough to learn my letters and simple sums. I treasured those school days like gold coins. Mrs. Wilson, the teacher, said, I had a quick mind and sometimes gave me books to take home. I'd read them by kerosene lamp after the others were asleep, dreaming of places beyond our county line. We weren't the poorest family around, but we lived on the knife edge of need. Meat was Sunday food, if that. Most days were cornbread, beans, and whatever vegetables we could grow. Store-bought sugar was a Christmas treat. I never had a doll that wasn't made from corn husks or scraps, but I had dreams. Oh, did I have dreams? I'd watch the Greyhound bus pass through town twice a week and imagine where it might take me someday. I loved climbing the big oak behind our house, higher than my brothers dared, until I could see clear to the blue ridge of mountains in the distance. From up there, the world seemed so much bigger than our little patch of hard scrabble living. I'd sit in those branches and plan my escape. Maybe I'd become a teacher or work in one of those big department stores in Birmingham, or even go to Nashville where the music played all night. I was 14 the summer. Everything changed. Still sleeping on a pallet with my 2 younger sisters. Still wearing hand-me-downs with patches on the patches. Still daydreaming in that oak tree. I was on the cusp of womanhood, but nowhere near ready to leave childhood behind. The morning it happened was hot. Alabama summer hot, where the air sits heavy on your skin like a wool blanket fresh from the line. I was helping Mama in the kitchen kneading dough for biscuits with flour up to my elbows when Daddy called for me. His voice had that tone, the one that stopped all 8 of us children in our tracks no matter what we were doing. Mabel Ruth, come in here. Need to talk to you. I wiped my hands on my apron, shot a confused look at Mama, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Something cold and heavy settled in my stomach as I walked to the front room where Daddy sat in his chair, the only cushioned one in the house, reserved for him alone. He wasn't a big man, my father, but he filled a room with his presence, hands gnarled and permanently dirt-stained from decades in the fields, face weathered like old leather from the Alabama sun. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me while rolling an unlit cigarette between his fingers. Sit down, girl, he finally said, nodding to the wooden stool near his feet. I perched there, hands folded in my lap, heart already racing, though I didn't know why. You're 14 now, he started, striking a match against his boot sole. Time for you to be a woman. I nodded, not understanding, thinking maybe this was about my monthly cycles that had started the year before, though Mama had already explained those to me in her brief, clinical way. "We've arranged a marriage for you." The world stopped. The seekers outside fell silent. The air in my lungs turned to cement. Marriage. My voice came out as a whisper. "Yes. Your betrothed has already settled everything with me. You'll go to his house tomorrow." My eyes darted to the doorway, seeking Mama, seeking rescue. She stood there, her face drawn, eyes on the floorboards. In that moment, I knew there would be no help from her corner. "I don't want to get married, Daddy." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. His hand came down hard on the arm of his chair, making me jump. "There isn't any want about it, Mabel Ruth. You think a woman gets to choose? Women don't choose, they obey." I was trembling now, my whole body quivering like a rabbit in a snare. "Who is he?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. Daddy took a long drag on his cigarette, exhaled the smoke in a cloud before answering. "Your husband-to-be is Mr. Everett Beaumont." The name fell on me like a stone. Mr. Beaumont was a wealthy landowner who lived in the big white house on the hill outside town. He was 49 years old, a widower with 3 grown sons, the youngest older than me. He owned the cotton gin where Daddy took our crop, owned the store where we bought what little we couldn't grow or make ourselves. He was one of the few men in the county who'd come through the Depression with his fortune intact, who'd never had to work a field himself. I stood up suddenly, my breathing fast and shallow. "Daddy, for God's sake, he's old enough to be my grandfather." "I can't marry him." The slap came so quick I didn't see it coming. It knocked me back onto the stool, the sting burning across my cheek, the taste of copper filling my mouth where my teeth had cut the inside. "You'll marry him and be a respectable woman," Daddy said, his voice flat and final. "Mr. Beaumont has paid a good doughy for you. Don't make trouble." And there in that cramped front room with the taste of blood in my mouth, I realized my life would never be my own again. I couldn't sleep that night. My little sister Jessie, who shared the pallet with me, noticed my tears and curled against me. "Why are you crying, Mabel?" she whispered in the darkness. I couldn't answer. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that tomorrow I would be given to a stranger, that I would never again sleep in this house, never again climb our oak tree, never again have the chance to dream of a different life? So I just held her close, memorizing the smell of her hair, the warmth of her small body against mine. Before I continue this painful chapter of my life, I'm curious. Where are you watching my story from? It amazes me to think my words might reach places I've never been, that my experience might touch hearts in towns and cities I've only dreamed about. If you'd take a moment to share in the comments where you're listening from, it would mean the world to this old woman. And if you'd subscribe to the channel and like this video, it helps more than you know. It means my story won't be forgotten, that it might help someone else going through their own dark times. Morning came as it always does, whether we want it to or not. Mama dressed me in my Sunday dress, a faded blue cotton thing that had been let out at the seams twice as I grew. It was the only nice clothing I owned, and even it was patched at the elbows. She brushed my hair with shaking hands, braiding it tightly down my back. "Be strong, my baby," she whispered, her eyes finally meeting mine, filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. "It'll be all right." But we both knew she was lying. Outside, a car waited. A real automobile, black and shining in the morning sun. A rare sight on our dirt road. Mr. Beaumont sat in the back seat, his driver at the wheel. He stepped out when he saw me. A tall figure in a pressed suit, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, his face serious under a wide-brimmed hat. "Beautiful girl," he said, looking me up and down like he was appraising livestock. "You'll give me fine sons." I wanted to vomit. I wanted to run. I wanted to climb my oak tree and never come down. But Daddy's hand was on my shoulder, pushing me forward. Mr. Beaumont opened the car door, gesturing me inside. I turned one last time to look at my home. The weathered boards, the sagging porch, the faces of my siblings peering through the windows. Mama stood with her arms crossed tight over her chest, as if holding herself together. As the car pulled away, dust billowing behind us, I watched my childhood disappear in the rear window. I knew I would never return, and in that moment I understood that my destiny was no longer my own. There are days we never forget, days branded into our skin, our souls, our memories, days that time cannot erase. My wedding day was one of those days, but to call it a wedding would be a lie. A wedding is a moment of joy, of celebration. What happened to me was a funeral. Only the thing that died there was me. The car jolted along the dirt road, shaking my body with every pothole we crossed. But nothing hurt more than the feeling of being taken to a fate I hadn't chosen. My hands were ice cold, trembling, sweating, my mouth dry. Mr. Beaumont sat beside me, silent, but occasionally glancing at me from the corner of his eye as if analysing what he had purchased. I wanted to disappear, to vanish right there, to turn to dust along with that road that seemed to never end. My home was falling behind. My brothers and sisters, my mother, what little childhood I had left. And before me, a man nearly 50 years old who had bought my life like you'd buy a workhorse. Mr. Beaumont's estate loomed ahead, a white colonial mansion with towering columns that seemed to pierce the sky. It sat on 20 acres of the richest land in the county, with peach orchards, stables, and cotton fields stretching toward the horizon. The house itself was larger than our church, with shuttered windows and a wraparound porch lined with rocking chairs that never seemed to move. As the car crunched up the gravel driveway, my throat closed up tight. Farm workers paused in their labor to watch us pass, their eyes following the car with a mixture of curiosity and something else. Something that looked uncomfortably like pity. A stern-faced woman in a pressed grey dress waited at the front steps, hands clasped before her like she was at a funeral. "Welcome, Miss Callaway," she said, her voice crisp as autumn leaves. "I'm Mrs. Ricks, the housekeeper. I trust your journey was pleasant, as if I'd come willingly, as if this were some social call instead of my imprisonment." "This way, please," she continued, not waiting for an answer. "You'll need to freshen up before the ceremony." The interior of the house was cool and dark, the air heavy with the scent of beeswax and something floral I couldn't name. My bare feet sank into carpet thicker than any bed I'd ever slept on. Paintings of stern-faced strangers stared down from walls panelled in dark wood. Everything gleamed, the banister, the side tables, the ornate mirror in the hallway that showed me a terrified girl with a bruise blooming on her cheek. Mrs. Ricks led me to a bedroom larger than our entire shotgun house. A white dress lay spread across a four-poster bed alongside undergarments finer than anything I'd ever touched. "Mr. Beaumont wants you presentable," she said, eyeing my faded blue dress with disapproval. "The bathroom is through there. Wash thoroughly. I'll return in 30 minutes to help with your hair." When she left, I stood frozen in the center of the room, afraid to touch anything. The windows were tall, reaching nearly from floor to ceiling. For one wild moment, I considered opening one, climbing out, running until my legs gave out. But where would I go? Who would take in a runaway girl with no money, no education, and a powerful man hunting her down? I was trapped as surely as if the room had been a cell. The ceremony took place at sunset in the Beaumont family chapel, a stone building at the edge of the property. No friends, no family, just a handful of local dignitaries. Mr. Beaumont's business associates and house staff arranged in neat rows of pews. Daddy sat near the front wearing his one good shirt, freshly pressed. He didn't look at me as I walked down the aisle. The preacher, a thin man with rheumy eyes, spoke of duty and obedience, of a woman's sacred role as helpmate and mother. Not once did he mention love. Not once did he mention choice. Do you, Mabel Ruth Callaway, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? A question that wasn't a question. A choice that wasn't a choice. My voice was so small I barely heard it myself. I do. And just like that, at 14 years old, I became Mrs. Everett Beaumont. There was a small reception afterward in the main house. People ate tiny sandwiches and drank champagne, conversing in low voices that hushed whenever I approached. I didn't eat. Couldn't. My stomach was a tight knot of dread, counting down the minutes until everyone would leave and I would be alone with him. Daddy left without saying goodbye, just shook Mr. Beaumont's Everett's hand, nodded once in my direction, and climbed into a neighbour's truck that would take him back to our farm. 20 richer than he'd been that morning. 20, the price of his eldest daughter. As darkness fell and the last guests departed, Mrs. Hricks approached me. Her face said in lines that might have been sympathetic if you looked at them sideways. "Mr. Beaumont is waiting for you in the master bedroom," she said quietly. "Top of the stairs, end of the hall." I stood at the base of that grand staircase for what seemed like hours, my legs refusing to carry me up. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the foyer, counting down seconds of freedom I'd never get back. Finally, I forced myself to climb. Each step felt like moving through molasses, my body growing heavier and heavier until I reached the door she'd indicated. I raised my hand to knock, then realized with a sickening lurch that I didn't need to knock. This was supposedly my room now, too. Inside, the master bedroom was dim, lit only by a lamp on the nightstand. Everett sat in an armchair by the window, smoking a cigar, his jacket removed and sleeves rolled up. He looked up when I entered, but didn't stand. "Come here, Mabel Ruth," he said, his voice thick with bourbon. I moved woodenly across the room until I stood before him, eyes fixed on the carpet. "You're my wife now," he said, reaching out to touch my hair. "Do you know what that means?" I nodded, though I didn't. Not really. Mama had never told me what happened between a man and his wife, only that it was my duty to obey and to bear children. The older girls at school had whispered things sometimes, but their knowledge seemed as fragmented as mine. "Good," he said, rising from his chair, towering over me. "Then you know what I expect." What followed that night lives in the darkest corners of my memory, locked away in a place I've tried for decades to forget. But some things can't be forgotten, only endured. Dawn found me curled on the far edge of the bed, silent tears soaking into a pillow finer than anything I'd ever slept on. My body no longer my own, in more ways than one. I learned quickly what my role was in the Beaumont house. I was to keep my husband content, manage the house staff, and look presentable when guests arrived. I was to speak when spoken to, laugh at the right moments, and vanish when business was discussed. I was, in essence, another piece of property, more valuable than the field workers, but less important than the prize horses in Everett's stable. Days fell into a pattern. I'd wake before Everett, dress in one of the many outfits. Mrs. Hendricks had ordered for me and take breakfast in the sunroom overlooking gardens I wasn't allowed to tend. The house staff, 3 maids, a cook, the groundskeeper, and Mrs. Hricks treated me with distant politeness, never forgetting that I was the boss's wife, but never quite accepting that I was truly the mistress of the house. I was forbidden from doing menial tasks. My hands, Everett said, were to remain soft. I couldn't cook the foods I'd grown up on: cornbread and beans, fried chicken, sweet potato pie. The French chef he employed served meals I couldn't pronounce in portions too small to satisfy. arranged like artwork on china plates worth more than my daddy's monthly income. I wasn't allowed to visit town alone. If I needed something, Mrs. Ricks would accompany me, watching my interactions with shopkeepers with hawkish intensity. I couldn't write letters without Everett reading them first, couldn't make phone calls without him listening in. My existence narrowed to the walls of that mansion and the carefully manicured grounds surrounding it. I became a ghost in lace and silk, drifting through rooms I wasn't allowed to dust, sleeping beside a man who saw me as a possession, dining at a table where I wasn't permitted to speak unless asked a direct question. The worst part was the loneliness. I missed my sister's whispers in the dark, my brother's rowdy laughter, even Mama's stern instructions and Daddy's gruff commands. I missed belonging somewhere, even if that somewhere had been poor and hard. At least there I'd been Mabel Ruth. Here I was reduced to Mrs. Beaumont, or Everett's young bride, spoken in tones that suggested both were euphemisms for something shameful. After 3 months, when my monthly blood didn't come, Mrs. Ricks nodded knowingly and summoned the doctor. His examination was clinical, humiliating, and confirmed what I already suspected. I was with child. Everett was pleased. This, after all, was why he'd acquired me, to replace his first wife, who died in childbirth 2 years prior to give him more sons to inherit his empire. He became almost gentle in the evenings, placing his hand on my still flat stomach, talking about names and potential schools. He gave me a pearl necklace to celebrate, fastening it around my neck with fingers that lingered too long like shackles disguised as jewelry. I was 15 years old, pregnant, and more alone than I'd ever been. It was autumn when Mrs. Jenkins, one of the maids, approached me as I sat on the back porch watching fallen leaves skitter across the lawn. "Mrs. Beaumont," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's someone asking for you at the kitchen door." I frowned. Nobody ever came asking for me. "Who is it?" "Says his name is Tommy. Says he's your brother." My heart leapt into my throat. Tommy was 16, the oldest of my siblings, the one who'd taught me to climb trees and catch crawdads in the creek. Where is he? I was already on my feet, moving toward the kitchen with more energy than I'd shown in months. "Mrs. Hendricks sent him away," Mrs. Jenkins said, eyes darting nervously toward the house. "But he said he'd wait by the old oak at the property line. Said to tell you he needs to talk to you important-like." I hesitated. Everett was in Birmingham on business. Mrs. Ricks was meeting with the butcher in town. "If I was quick, cover for me," I whispered. "Please, I'll be back before anyone notices." Mrs. Jenkins looked terrified but nodded once sharply. "Be quick, Mrs. Beaumont, and be careful." I slipped out the back door and cut across the south lawn, keeping close to the hedge iron where I wouldn't be visible from the house. My heart hammered against my ribs, partly from exertion, I hadn't run in months, and partly from fear. If Everett found out I'd defied him, there would be consequences. But Tommy was waiting. My brother. A piece of the family I'd thought I'd lost forever. The ancient oak stood at the far corner of the property, its massive branches reaching over the stone wall that marked the boundary, and there, leaning against its trunk, was a lanky boy in overalls, too short for his growing frame. "Tommy," I called, forgetting caution in my joy. He turned, face splitting into a grin that revealed the chipped front tooth from a baseball mishap years ago. Mabel Ruth. We collided in a fierce hug, his arms wrapping around me with the unrestrained affection I'd been starved for since leaving home. I pulled back to look at him. He'd grown taller, his face thinning out from boy to young man, and something inside me cracked open. "What are you doing here?" I asked, wiping away tears I hadn't realized were falling. "Is everyone okay?" "How did you find me?" Tommy's face sobered. "Everybody's fine, more or less. Jessie cries for you sometimes at night. Mama too, though she tries to hide it." He scuffed at the ground with his worn boot. "I've been saving up, taking odd jobs after school. Got enough for a bus ticket and asked around till someone pointed me to this place. I touched his face, hardly believing he was real. You shouldn't have come. If Everett finds out, I had to see you, Tommy interrupted. Had to know you were all right. People in town, they talk. Say things about Beaumont, about how he treated his first wife. A chill ran through me, settling in my bones. What things, Tommy? He looked away, jaw clenching. Bad things, Mabel, that he's mean when he drinks, that his first wife wasn't just unlucky in childbirth, that she was... He trailed off, unable to find words for what he'd heard, or perhaps unwilling to speak them aloud to make them real for his sister. I'm fine, I lied, forcing a smile. He treats me well. I have nice things. I gestured vaguely at my dress, my shoes, the pearl necklace that suddenly felt like it was choking me. Tommy wasn't fooled. His eyes, so like mine, saw through the facade to the frightened girl beneath. You don't have to stay here, Mabel Ruth. I've got a plan. I can get you away. For one dizzying moment, hope flared in my chest. Bright, dangerous hope that stole my breath. How? I know a fellow with a car. He can pick you up, take you to the Greyhound station in Birmingham. I've got money for a ticket to Nashville. Got a cousin there who says you can stay till you find work. You're smart, Mabel. You could be a secretary or work in a store. The hope dimmed as reality reasserted itself. Tommy, I can't. Why not? His face flushed with teenage indignation. You think we don't know what's happening to you? You think Mama doesn't cry herself to sleep knowing what Daddy did? I placed my hand on my stomach, still flat under my dress. I'm having a baby, Tommy. His eyes widened, dropping to where my hand rested. All the more reason to get out now before Mrs. Beaumont. Mrs. Fricks's voice cut through the air like a whip. I turned to see her striding across the lawn, face thunderous, two of the groundskeepers flanking her like prison guards. Go, I whispered urgently, pushing Tommy toward the wall. Go now. I'll come back, he promised, gripping my hands tightly. I'll find a way to help you, Mabel Ruth. I swear it. And then he was gone, scrambling over the wall and disappearing into the woods beyond, leaving me to face Mrs. Ricks's wrath and the punishment that would surely follow when Everett returned. But something had changed inside me. A seed had been planted, taking root alongside the child growing in my womb. Tommy had shown me something I'd forgotten existed. Possibility. The chance, however slim, of another life beyond these walls. For the first time since that car had driven me away from everything I knew, I allowed myself to think the most dangerous thought of all. Escape. The punishment for my meeting with Tommy was swift and severe. When Everett returned from Birmingham that evening, Mrs. Hendricks wasted no time informing him of my transgression. I was summoned to his study, a dark, panelled room thick with cigar smoke and the scent of leather-bound books I wasn't permitted to read. You've disappointed me, Mabel Ruth, he said, not bothering to look up from the ledger spread before him. Mrs. Hriss tells me you had an unauthorized visitor today. My hands trembled, but I clasped them tightly before me. It was my brother, sir. I hadn't seen my family in months. Your family, he repeated, finally raising his eyes to mine. They were cold, calculating. You seem to have forgotten, Mrs. Beaumont. I am your family now. That child you carry is your family. Those people you came from, they sold you to me for 20 and a promise to forget their debts at my store. His words landed like physical blows. I knew they contained truth. Daddy had indeed taken money from me, but to hear it stated so baldly made my throat close up with shame and anger. You are forbidden from leaving the house without an escort, Everett continued. No more walks in the garden, no more sitting on the porch. You'll remain inside where I can be certain you're safe. Safe? As if his concern were for my well-being rather than his ownership. And if that boy or any of your people come around again, I'll have them arrested for trespassing. Do I make myself clear? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Good. Now come here. What followed was a demonstration of ownership, a reminder that my body belonged to him by law and by deed. I retreated inside myself, finding that quiet corner of my mind where I'd been hiding pieces of myself since the day I arrived. When it was over, he dismissed me as casually as he might a servant who'd brought him coffee. 2 days later, I discovered I was bleeding. The pain started as a dull ache in my lower back, then clawed its way around to my belly, doubling me over as I climbed the stairs. By evening, the sheets were stained crimson, and Mrs. Hendricks's pinched face told me what I already knew. The baby was gone. The loss of that child, however it came to be, marked a turning point in my journey. If my story has touched you so far, please subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below. Your support helps ensure that women's stories like mine, the painful truths we've carried silently for decades, can finally be heard. The doctor came and went, murmuring platitudes about God's will and trying again. Everett stood in the doorway of the bedroom, his expression unreadable, before turning away without a word. That night, for the first time, he slept in the guest room down the hall. Grief is a strange thing. I mourned a child I had never wanted, conceived in circumstances I would never have chosen. Yet the loss hollowed me out, leaving an emptiness that echoed with might have been. That tiny life, however it had begun, had been the only thing in this house that was truly mine. As autumn deepened into winter, the house grew colder, not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. Everett withdrew, spending more time in Birmingham on business, leaving me alone in the echoing mansion with only Mrs. Ricks and the staff for company. When he was home, his mood swung between indifference and a possessive rage that left bruises where clothing would hide them. The drinking got worse. He'd return late, whiskey on his breath, and stumble into my room, demanding his husbandly rights. Some nights, when the bourbon had dulled his senses enough, he'd speak to me, not as Mabel Ruth, but as Catherine, his first wife. In those moments, slurring his words into my hair, he'd reveal fragments of their relationship that chilled my blood. "You always were frigid, Catherine," he'd mutter. "Never wanted to be touched. Is that why you lost my son?" Despite me, I learned in pieces that Catherine had been from old money in Savannah, a marriage arranged to combine family fortunes, that she'd been beautiful but distant, that she'd lost 2 babies before the final pregnancy that took her life, that Everett believed or had convinced himself that she'd somehow done it deliberately to escape him. It was during one of these drunken confessions that the seed of an idea planted by Tommy's visit began to sprout. Everett wasn't just cruel. He was unhinged, dangerous in ways that went beyond the everyday brutality of an entitled husband. If I stayed, I might end up like Catherine, another tragic young wife buried in the Beaumont family plot. I needed to leave. But how? Where would I go? I had no money, no education beyond 8th grade, no skills that would earn me a living. The world outside these walls was as foreign to me now as the mansion had been when I first arrived. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Jenkins, the maid who had warned me about Tommy's visit, began leaving things in my room. Newspapers, magazines, notes scribbled on scraps of kitchen paper. Small acts of rebellion that could have cost her job if discovered. One evening in February 1963, she slipped me a page torn from Life magazine. Circled in pencil was an advertisement. Help wanted. Young women for telephone operators, training provided. Room and board available. Apply Southern Belle, Nashville, Tennessee. Telephone operators, room and board. Nashville. Where Tommy had said our cousin lived, my heart began to race. Was it possible? Could I really escape? The next day, while dusting the bookshelves in Everett's study, one of the few household tasks I was permitted as a display of welly devotion, I checked his desk calendar. He would be in Montgomery for 3 days the following week, meeting with state officials about some business matter he deemed too complex for my feminine understanding. 3 days. Enough time to get to Nashville if I could find a way out of the house and to the bus station. 15 minutes away. Mrs. Jenkins and I formed a plan, whispered in snatches while she helped me dress or brought afternoon tea. She had a brother with a truck who sometimes delivered vegetables to the kitchen. He could take me to the Greyhound station in Birmingham. From there, I could catch the overnight bus to Nashville. I would need money. This was the most dangerous part. Everett kept cash in his desk drawer. Mad money, he called it, for impulse purchases or bribes. I'd never taken so much as a penny before, but desperation makes thieves of even the most honest souls. The night before Everett's trip, while he slept off a particularly heavy bout of drinking, I crept into his study. The drawer wasn't locked. Why would it be when his wife never went anywhere, never bought anything without his approval? I took 60, enough for a ticket, and a few days' food until I could find work. My hands shook so badly I dropped some coins, the sound of metal on hardwood freezing my blood. But Everett didn't stir, and I returned to our bed, the stolen bills burning a hole in my nightgown pocket. The day of his departure dawned grey and drizzling, a chill February rain that matched my mood. I helped him pack, hands steady despite the thundering of my heart. He barely looked at me as he gave his usual instructions to Mrs. Ricks. What I should eat, when I should rest, which rooms needed attention from the staff. I expect everything to be in perfect order when I return, he said, adjusting his hat in the foyer mirror. You've been too pale lately, Mabel Ruth. Get some colour back in your cheeks. His kiss on my forehead was perfunctor, possessive rather than affectionate. As the car pulled away down the gravel drive, I didn't wave. I wouldn't miss this place, this life, this cage disguised as luxury. Mrs. Jenkins's brother was due at the kitchen door at midnight with a delivery of early spring vegetables, a cover for my escape. I spent the day in careful preparation, packing only what I could carry in a small vice. 2 dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush, the pearl necklace Everett had given me when I told him I was pregnant. I'd sell it in Nashville, use the money to start over. I wrote a letter too, though I knew it would only enrage him, but something in me needed to leave words behind to make clear that I was choosing to go, that I wasn't lost or taken. Everett, I wrote, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't look for me. I'm not Catherine, and I won't die in this house. I sealed it in an envelope and left it on his pillow. Let him find it when he returned. When I was already miles away beyond his reach, the hours crawled by. I sat at the window watching rain streak the glass, jumping at every sound, certain that somehow he knew that he'd come back early and catch me in the act of betrayal. Evening came, the house settling into its nighttime rhythm. The cook left at 7 after preparing a dinner. I couldn't eat. The day departed at 8. By 9, only Mrs. Hendricks and Mrs. Jenkins remained, one my jailer, the other my accomplice. I feigned a headache and retired early, telling Mrs. Ricks. I didn't want to be disturbed. In my room, I dressed in my warmest clothes, layering a sweater under my coat. February in Tennessee would be cold, especially for a southern Alabama girl. At 11, I heard Mrs. Hendricks's footsteps in the hall, her ritual check of the doors and windows before she retired to her quarters in the East Wing. At 11:30, the house went silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer and the drumming of rain on the roof. I waited until 11:45, then picked up my Val and crept downstairs, avoiding the third step that always creaked. The house was dark, shadows stretching like grasping hands across the polished floors I'd never been allowed to walk on in bare feet in the kitchen. Mrs. Jenkins waited, her face tight with anxiety. "He's here," she whispered around back by the gardener's shed. "Thank you," I said, meaning it with every fibre of my being. For everything. She pressed a small package into my hands. Sandwiches for the trip. And Mabel Ruth, she hesitated, then pressed something else into my palm. A tiny cross on a silver chain for protection. I hugged her fiercely. This woman who had risked everything to help a girl she barely knew. Then I slipped out the back door into the rain-soaked night. The gardener's shed was a hunched silhouette at the edge of the formal gardens, barely visible through the curtain of rain. I ran toward it, shoes squatching in mud, coat already soaked through. A man stood beside an ancient pickup truck, collar turned up against the weather. "Mrs. Beaumont?" he called softly. "Yes," I gasped, reaching him. "You're Mrs. Jenkins's brother." He nodded, taking my vowel and tossing it into the truck bed. "Name's Ray. Get in quick. We got to be on the road before anyone notices." I climbed into the passenger seat, the vinyl cold and cracked beneath my legs. The truck smelled of earth and tobacco and something slightly sweet. Freedom, perhaps. Rye started the engine, the rumble seeming impossibly loud in the quiet night. "Keep your head down till we're off the property," he advised, putting the truck in gear. Just in case anyone's watching, I slid down in the seat, heart hammering against my ribs as we bumped down the service road that led to the rear gate. Every second stretched into eternity. Every splash through a puddle sounding like a thunderclap in my ears. And then we were through the gate, turning onto the county road, picking up speed as Ray pointed us toward Birmingham and the bus station. I straightened in my seat, turning to look back at the Beaumont mansion. Through the rain and darkness, I could just make out its silhouette. Windows dark, white columns gleaming ghostly in the night. For nearly a year that house had been my prison. Its luxury a gilded cage that had nearly broken me. Now, watching it recede into the distance, I felt something unfurling in my chest, something that might with time and distance become hope. "You all right, miss?" Rye asked, glancing at me as we turned onto the main highway. I realized I was crying, silent tears mingling with raindrops on my cheeks. "Yes," I said, and meant it for the first time in a very long time. "I think I might be." The Greyhound station in Birmingham was a harsh fluorescent island in the night, nearly empty at that late hour, except for a few drowsy travellers and a board ticket agent. Ray waited until I'd purchased my ticket, one way to Nashville, departing at 2:15 a.m., before reluctantly leaving me. "You sure you'll be all right?" he asked, eyeing the mostly empty station dubiously. "My sister would have my hide if anything happened to you." "I'll be fine," I assured him, summoning a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "Thank you for everything. Please tell Mrs. Jenkins." I trailed off, uncertain how to express my gratitude for the risk they'd both taken. Rye nodded, understanding without words. "Good luck, Mrs. Beaumont." "Mabel Ruth," I corrected him. Just Mabel Ruth Callaway again. For the next hour and a half, I sat stiffly on a plastic bench, valise clutched to my chest, jumping at every sound. Each time the station door opened, my heart seized with terror that it would be Everett or one of his men come to drag me back to that beautiful prison on the hill. But no one came for me. At 2:15 sharp, the bus pulled in, a gleaming silver monster with Nashville illuminated on its destination board. I boarded with shaking legs, found a seat near the middle, and pressed my face to the window as the driver fired up the engine. As the bus pulled away from the station, leaving Birmingham and Alabama behind, I allowed myself to exhale fully for the first time in nearly a year. I was 16 years old, alone with 60 and a stolen pearl necklace to my name. But I was free. The bus rumbled through the night, wipers beating a steady rhythm against the rain. Around me, other passengers dozed or stared silently out windows, reflecting their tired faces. No one paid any attention to a young girl traveling alone, one of the few blessings of being invisible. Somewhere around the Tennessee border, as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, I finally let exhaustion claim me. I dreamed of oak trees and creek beds, of my little sister's laughing faces, of a future that might somehow be mine to shape. When I awoke, the landscape outside had changed. Rolling hills instead of Alabama flatlands. Different trees, different soil. We were in Tennessee, nearing Nashville, according to the driver's crackling announcement over the intercom. I sat up straighter, smoothing my rumpled dress, trying to tidy my hair with fingers that still trembled slightly. In a few minutes, I'd step off this bus into a city I'd never seen, without a plan beyond finding the telephone company office and hoping they'd hire a girl with no experience and a suspicious lack of references. Fear churned in my stomach, but beneath it was something stronger. Determination. I'd escaped a life sentence as Everett Beaumont's child bride. Whatever happened next, it would be on my own terms. The Nashville terminal was crowded, bustling with morning commuters and travelers. I clutched my vase tightly, overwhelmed by the noise and movement after months of enforced stillness in that quiet mansion. For a disorienting moment, I considered getting back on the bus, returning to the devil I knew rather than facing this sea of strangers. Then I pictured Everett's face when he found my note, imagined his rage, his wounded pride, his determination to bring back his property. No, there was no going back, only forward. One step at a time. I approached an information desk staffed by a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and iron-gay hair. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said, my Alabama accent suddenly seeming very pronounced. "Could you tell me how to find the Southern Bell office? I've come about a job." She looked me over, taking in my wrinkled dress, my too thin frame, the shadows under my eyes. Something in her expression softened. "Telephone companies hiring." "Is it?" She pulled out a city map circling a location with her pencil. 3 blocks that way. Big building with blue doors. "Can't miss it," she hesitated, then added gently. "They don't usually start interviews till 9. "Honey, you look like you could use some breakfast first." My stomach growled at the mention of food. I hadn't eaten since the sandwiches Mrs. Jenkins packed, consumed nervously on the bus, somewhere in northern Alabama. "There's a decent diner around the corner," the woman continued. "Tell Marlene at the counter that Betty sent you. She might even have some information about rooms to let if you're needing a place." "Thank you," I said, clutching the map like a lifeline. "I appreciate your kindness," she smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Us women have to look out for each other in this world, don't we?" I nodded, throat suddenly tight. She didn't know my story, couldn't possibly guess what I was running from. Yet somehow she recognized a fellow traveler on a difficult road. The diner was warm and fragrant with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. I found a seat at the counter, ordered eggs and toast, and asked for Marlene. The waitress who served me, a bottle blonde with bright red lipstick and eyes that had seen more of life than they let on, nodded. "That's me, honey. Betty sent you, huh? You looking for work or a room or both?" "Both," I admitted. "I'm hoping to get hired at the telephone company, but I need somewhere to stay tonight either way." Marlene considered me, head tilted. "Got a cousin runs a boarding house for young ladies. Clean place, decent neighborhood, not too expensive. No men allowed past the front parlor, strict curfew. That suit you?" It sounded like paradise. "Yes, Mom." "That would be perfect." She scribbled an address on an order pad. "Tell Helen I sent you. She might let you work in the kitchen to cover part of your room and board till you get on your feet." I ate my breakfast slowly, savoring each bite of real food. The diner filled with morning customers. Office workers grabbing coffee, truck drivers stopping for a hot meal between routes, ladies shopping early to beat the crowds. Normal people living normal lives. Maybe, just maybe, I could be one of them. By 8:30 I'd paid my bill, thanked Marlene profusely, and was walking the 3 blocks to the Southern Bell office, my feeling lighter despite its unchanged contents. The city hummed around me, cars honking, shop owners raising awnings, children heading to school with lunchboxes swinging from small hands. The telephone company building loomed ahead, impossibly tall to my country eyes. I paused on the sidewalk, staring up at its many windows, fear momentarily overtaking determination. What was I doing here? Who did I think I was imagining I could start over like this? A memory surfaced. Tommy sitting in that oak tree telling me I was smart, that I could be a secretary or work in a store. My brother had believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Drawing a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and climbed the steps to those blue doors. Inside, a reception area bustled with activity, young women in identical uniforms coming and going, phones ringing, the clicking of typewriter keys, a steady backdrop. I approached the front desk where a stern-faced woman sat behind a nameplate, identifying her as Mrs. Eleanor Watson, Personnel Director. "May I help you?" she asked, not looking up from the papers before her. "Yes, ma'am," I said, willing my voice not to shake. "I've come about the telephone operator position, the one advertised in Life magazine." Now she looked up, assessing me with sharp eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, ma'am. I just arrived in Nashville. But I'm a quick learner, and I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired." A faint smile crossed her lips. "Confident, aren't you? Fill out this application. We'll need references. Previous employment history, education background." My heart sank as she handed me a form. References. Previous employment. All I had was a year as a child bride, and before that farm work that had never been formal employment. I don't have references, I admitted. I just turned 16. I've never had a proper job." Mrs. Watson's eyebrows rose. 16. The advertisement specified 18 and older. "Please," I said, desperation edging into my voice. "I need this job. I need a fresh start. I'll do whatever it takes to prove myself." Something in my expression must have reached her because her face softened slightly. "What's your name, young lady?" "Mabel Ruth Callaway." My birth name felt strange on my tongue after months of being Mrs. Beaumont, but it was mine again now. "Well, Miss Callaway, Southern Belle doesn't typically hire girls under 18. She paused, studying me. "However, we do have a clerical training program for high school graduates. Are you still in school?" I shook my head. "No, ma'am. I had to leave after 8th grade." Another piece of my life stolen by poverty and circumstance. Mrs. Watson sighed. "I see." She seemed to make a decision, straightening the papers on her desk. "We occasionally make exceptions for special circumstances. Would those apply in your case, Miss Callaway?" I didn't know what special circumstances meant in the corporate world of Southern Belle, but I recognized an offered lifeline when I saw one. "Yes, ma'am," I said firmly. "They would." She nodded once briskly. "Very well. Fill out what you can on the application. Leave blank what you can't answer truthfully. I'll interview you myself at 10 recess." Relief washed through me like a summer storm. "Thank you, Mrs. Watson. Thank you so much." As I sat in the waiting area, pencil hovering over the many blanks on the application form, I realized something profound. For the first time since that morning in my father's kitchen, I was making a choice about my own life. It might not work out. Mrs. Watson might decide I wasn't suitable. The boarding house might not take me. The money might run out before I found another opportunity. But whatever happened next, it would be because of decisions I made, paths I chose to walk or turn away from. My life was my own again, for better or worse, and that more than anything felt like freedom. That interview with Mrs. Watson changed everything. I still remember sitting across from her desk, hands folded in my lap, to hide their trembling as she studied my mostly blank application form. "Miss Callaway," she said finally, "I'm going to be direct with you. Your qualifications on paper are minimal." My heart sank. "Yes, ma'am." "However," she continued, "there's something to be said for determination, and you certainly seem determined." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Mrs. Watson leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled beneath her chin. "Are you running from something, Miss Callaway, or someone?" The question caught me off guard. I'd prepared answers about my work ethic, my willingness to learn, my attention to detail. I hadn't prepared for such blunt honesty. "Yes, ma'am," I admitted after a long pause. "I am?" She nodded as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "I thought as much. I won't ask for details. That's your business. But I will ask, are you in any legal trouble? Is someone likely to come looking for you here?" "No legal trouble," I said quickly. As for someone looking, I hesitated. Would Everett search for me? Would he care enough about his wounded pride to hunt down a teenage bride who'd fled in the night? Possibly, but I have no intention of being found. Mrs. Watson studied me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she smiled. A brief, tight expression, but genuine nonetheless. 20 years ago, I came to Nashville in circumstances not entirely unlike yours, Miss Callaway. Different details, perhaps, but the same desperate need for a fresh start. She straightened a pencil on her desk with precise fingers. I wouldn't be where I am today if someone hadn't taken a chance on me then. So I'm inclined to pay that forward. Hope bloomed in my chest. Fragile but persistent. "Does that mean it means you start Monday morning?" "Not as an operator. You're still too young for that position. But we need file clerks in the records department. It's entry-level work, but it pays a living wage." She scribbled something on a notepad. "Report here at 8 sharp. Dress appropriately, clean, modest, professional. We'll provide training." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. A job. A real job with a paycheck and responsibilities and a chance to prove myself. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down, Mrs. Watson. See that you don't." Her tone was brisk, but her eyes held understanding. "And Mabel Ruth, whatever or whoever you're running from, I hope you find what you're looking for here." That first night at Helen's boarding house felt like stepping into another world. The 3-story Victorian on a quiet residential street housed 12 young women, most working as secretaries, shop girls, or nurses in training. My room was tiny, barely larger than a closet, but it was mine alone with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window overlooking a dogwood tree in the side yard. Helen herself was a widow in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded me oddly of Mrs. Hendris. But unlike the Beaumont housekeeper, Helen's strictness came from genuine concern for her girls, as she called us. "Rules are simple," she told me as she showed me to my room. "Curfew at 10 on weeknights, midnight on Saturdays. No alcohol, no men past the front parlour. No cooking in your rooms. 3 meals a day included in your rent. Miss them? You go hungry. Church on Sundays is encouraged, but not mandatory. I run a respectable house, Miss Callaway." "Yes, ma'am," I said, setting my valise on the bed. "I understand," she softened slightly, taking in my worn dress and exhausted face. "Bathrooms down the hall. Dinner's at 6 sharp. Rest a bit before then. You look like you need it." When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hands over the simple cotton coverlet. After nearly a year in Everett's mansion, surrounded by silk and crystal and antiques worth more than my father's farm, this humble room should have felt like a step down. Instead, it felt like wealth beyond measure. Here, I didn't need to tiptoe across expensive rugs or worry about smudging polished surfaces. Here, I could breathe. The other boarders welcomed me with curious friendliness at dinner. A simple but hearty meal of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. They were a mix of ages from 18 to nearly 30, all making their way in Nashville by themselves. "Where are you from?" asked Betty Sue. A round-faced girl with bottle blonde hair who worked at a downtown department store. "Alabama," I said, keeping it vague. "Small town? You wouldn't know it." I'm from Knoxville myself, she continued, passing the breadbasket. Came to Nashville 2 years ago after my fiancé ran off with my cousin. Figured a fresh start was in order. The other girls laughed and nodded, sharing their own stories of why they'd come to the city. Broken engagements, family expectations they couldn't meet, dreams of careers their small towns couldn't support. None of them mentioned being child brides escaping abusive husbands, but each had fled something, searched for something. I wasn't so different after all. That first week at Southern Belle passed in a blur of new routines and responsibilities. The records department was a vast room in the basement, lined with filing cabinets containing customer information, service records, and billing histories. My job was simple but vital. Filing papers in the correct folders, retrieving records when requested, updating information as it changed. The work was repetitive but required attention to detail. A misplaced file could mean a customer service was interrupted or a bill went unpaid. I took pride in doing it well, in being reliable and thorough. Each perfectly organized drawer felt like a small victory, proof that I could succeed in this new life. I was the youngest employee by several years. Most of my co-workers were women in their 20s and 30s, many supporting themselves or contributing to family incomes. They took me under their wing, showing me the ropes, sharing homemade lunches, advising me on everything from where to buy affordable clothes to which bus routes were safest after dark. My first paycheck was a revelation, $42 for a week's work. More money than I'd held at one time in my entire life. After paying Helen for room and board, I still had enough to buy a new dress for work, a pair of sensible shoes, and a small bottle of rosewater perfume. My first ever purchase just for myself, just because I wanted it. Spring bloomed into summer, and with it came a growing confidence. I settled into routines, work during the week, laundry and shopping on Saturdays, sometimes a movie with the other boarders if we pooled our money. On Sundays, I often walked downtown, exploring Nashville's streets and parks, marveling at how quickly the city was becoming familiar, how easily I navigated its bustle after the isolated quiet of the Beaumont estate. In July, Mrs. Watson called me into her office. My stomach nodded with anxiety. Had I made a mistake? Was I being let go? "Miss Callaway," she said when I stood nervously before her desk, "your supervisors speak highly of your work. You're punctual, accurate, and apparently have a filing system even more efficient than our standard procedures." I felt my cheeks warm. "Thank you, ma'am. There's an opening in the typing pool. Better pay, more responsibility. Are you interested?" "Yes," I said immediately, "but I don't know how to type." She smiled, that rare expression that transformed her stern face. "We offer training classes after hours, 2 nights a week for 6 weeks. If you're willing to put in the time, the position will be held for you." I nearly wept with gratitude. "I'll work harder than anyone's ever worked at typing, Mrs. Watson. I promise." For 6 weeks, I stayed late on Tuesdays and Thursdays, practicing finger positions and key strikes until my hands cramped. At night, I'd trace keyboard layouts on my bedsheet, memorizing the position of each letter. By August, I could type 40 words per minute with minimal errors. Not the fastest in the class, but respectable enough to qualify for the promotion. The typing pool was on the 2nd floor, a large room filled with rows of typewriters and the constant clatter of keys. My job expanded to include typing internal memos, customer correspondence, and service reports. Each perfectly formatted letter felt like a personal triumph, evidence of how far I'd come from the frightened girl who'd stepped off that bus in February. It was in the typing pool that I met Sarah Jenkins, no relation to the maid who had helped me escape. Sarah was 22, college-educated with sleek dark hair and a confidence I envied. She'd been at Southern Belle for just 6 months, but was already being groomed for management. We bonded over lunch breaks, sharing sandwiches and stories, though I kept mine carefully edited, still wary of revealing too much about my past. You should take night classes at the community college, Sarah told me one afternoon in the break room. With your brains, you could get a business degree in a few years, maybe even become a supervisor. The idea was so startling I nearly choked on my coffee. College had never been an option in my family. Not for my brothers, certainly not for the girls. Education beyond the basics was for rich folks, city folks, not for sharecroppers, children from nowhere, Alabama. I didn't even finish high school, I reminded her. Sarah waved this away. Get your GED first, then enroll. Plenty of people do it. Southern Belle might even help with tuition if you sign an agreement to stay with the company. That night, I lay awake in my narrow bed. Sarah's suggestions spinning through my mind. College, a degree, a career path instead of just a job. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Could I really do it? Was I smart enough? Determined enough? The face of 14-year-old Mabel Ruth flashed in my memory, sitting in that oak tree, dreaming of escape, of possibilities beyond the horizon. I owed it to her to try. The next day, I asked Mrs. Watson about education assistance. To my surprise, she not only confirmed that Southern Belle had such a program, but helped me complete the application paperwork herself. I thought you might ask eventually, she said, her pen moving efficiently across the forms. You've got potential, Miss Callaway. Too much to spend your life in the typing pool. By September 1963, 7 months after my escape from Alabama, I was enrolled in evening GED preparation classes at the YWCA. 3 nights a week after a full day at Southern Belle, I sat at a classroom desk learning algebra, history, science, and literature. Some nights I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. But I persisted, driven by a hunger to reclaim the education that had been stolen from me. The other women in the class came from backgrounds similar to mine. High school dropouts due to poverty, early marriage, family obligations, or simply the limited expectations society placed on girls in the rural South. We formed a tight-knit group, encouraging each other through difficult material, celebrating each small victory. It was through these classes that I met Eleanor Roosevelt's words for the first time. A quote our teacher, Mrs. Phillips, had written on the blackboard: "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I copied it into my notebook and read it each night before bed. A mantra against the voice of Everett that sometimes still echoed in my head, telling me I was nothing, nobody, worthless, without him. As 1963 drew to a close, I realized with a start that I hadn't thought about Everett or the Beaumont mansion in weeks. The nightmares that had plagued me through spring and summer, dreams of being dragged back, locked away, punished for my defiance, had gradually faded. I no longer jumped at unexpected sounds or scrutinized every man on the street searching for his face. I'd begun to heal, to build a life that was truly mine. I had a job with prospects for advancement, education goals, a small but growing savings account, and friends who knew me as Mabel Ruth Callaway, file clerk and typing pool member, not as Mrs. Beaumont, child bride and possession. Then, 3 days before Christmas, a letter arrived that shattered my hard-won peace. I came back to the boarding house after work to find Helen waiting in the front hall, an envelope in her hand. "This came for you," she said, her expression concerned. "The return address is Alabama." My blood froze. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Had Everett found me? Was this a threat? A demand for my return? With trembling fingers I took the envelope. The handwriting wasn't his. It was smaller, neater, feminine. The return address wasn't the Beaumont estate, but a town I didn't recognize. I took it to my room, closing the door before slitting it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper covered in the same careful handwriting. "Dear Mabel Ruth," it began. "I pray this letter finds you safe. It's your sister Jessie writing to you. Tommy gave me this address. he said. "You're in Nashville now and doing well. Mama wanted you to know that Daddy passed last month." His heart gave out in the fields. "The funeral was small. We wish you could have been there, but we understand why you couldn't." Tears blurred my vision. Daddy was gone. The man who had sold me to Everett, who had decided my childhood was worth 20, and the eraser of debts. I should have felt relief, maybe even satisfaction. But all I felt was a complicated grief for the father. He might have been in different circumstances, for the relationship we'd never have, for the apology I'd never receive. I wiped my eyes and continued reading. There's more news. After the funeral, a man came to the house. "Mr. Beaumont's lawyer," he said. "Your marriage has been dissolved on grounds of abandonment. You're not his wife anymore. Mabel Ruth, you're free. Tommy says to tell you we're all doing all right. He's working at the garage in town, sending money home when he can. The little ones miss you something fierce. Mama doesn't talk about what happened, but I've seen her crying at night. I think she has regrets. We all do. If you can write back so we know you got this. We don't expect you to come home. This isn't home for you anymore. I understand that. But maybe someday we might see each other again. I hope so. Your loving sister, Jessie." I read the letter 3 times, emotions churning, dissolved. Not his wife, free. The word seemed impossible, too good to be true. Had Everett really let me go? It didn't match what I knew of him, his possessiveness, his pride. But perhaps his pride was exactly why he'd ended our marriage. A man like Everett couldn't bear the public humiliation of a wife who'd fled, who'd rejected the life he offered. Better to erase me legally than admit he couldn't control me. Whatever his reasons, the result was the same. I was officially, legally Mabel Ruth Callaway again. No one could force me back to Alabama, back to that house, back to him. That night I wrote 2 letters. One to Jessie, telling her I was safe, working at the telephone company, taking classes, building a life in Nashville. I kept the details vague. My family didn't need to know the full truth of what I'd endured in that mansion. But I was honest about my happiness, my hope for the future. The second letter was to Tommy. I owed him my freedom, my life. Without his visit that day, without his belief that I deserved better, I might never have found the courage to flee. I told him everything I couldn't tell Jessie about Mrs. Jenkins and Ray, about the midnight escape, about the kindness of strangers who'd helped me start over. I told him he could visit any time, that Nashville had jobs for skilled mechanics too, if he ever wanted a change. I carried both letters to the post office the next morning, dropping them in the mailbox with a sense of coming full circle. I'd left Alabama with nothing but fear and desperate hope. Now I was reaching back, not to return but to reclaim the pieces of my past worth keeping. My siblings, my childhood memories, the parts of me that existed before and after being Mrs. Beaumont. The years that followed shaped me in ways I never could have imagined. That terrified night on the Greyhound bus. I earned my GED in the summer of 1964, celebrating with my classmates at a small diner near the YWCA. That fall, with Southern Bell's tuition assistance, I enrolled in night classes at the community college, studying business administration. By day, I continued at the telephone company, advancing from the typing pool to administrative assistant to junior supervisor by 1968. The work was challenging, but satisfying. Each promotion validation that I was capable, competent, valuable on my own terms. The world was changing around me too. The civil rights movement reshaped the South I'd grown up in. The Vietnam War claimed the lives of boys I'd known in Nashville. Women began speaking out about inequality, about limited opportunities, about the right to control their own bodies and lives. I watched it all with a personal understanding of what freedom meant, what it cost, what it was worth. Tommy came to visit in the spring of 1965, staying for a weekend in a boarding house down the street from mine. He'd grown taller, filled out, become a man while I wasn't looking. We spent hours walking through Nashville, catching up on the years apart, careful to build a new relationship as adults, rather than dwell on the painful past that had separated us. "You look happy, Mabel Ruth," he said as we sat on a park bench watching children play. "Real happy, not just pretending." "I am," I told him, realizing it was completely true. "I built this life for myself. Every piece of it. Nobody can take it away." He squeezed my hand, understanding in ways few others could. In 1967, I moved out of Helen's boarding house into my own apartment, a tiny one-bedroom above a bookstore in a neighborhood near the college. It wasn't much, but it was mine alone. I painted the walls yellow, hung curtains I'd sewn myself, arranged furniture found at thrift stores and yard sales. Each object, however humble, represented a choice I'd made, a small freedom exercise. When I graduated with my associate's degree in 1969, Mrs. Watson attended the ceremony, sitting beside Tommy and Jessie, who'd come from Alabama for the occasion. The four of us went to dinner afterward, celebrating not just my academic achievement, but the journey that had brought me to it. "I knew you had it in you," Mrs. Watson said, raising her glass in a toast. From that first interview, I knew life wasn't perfect. Of course, there were lonely nights, financial struggles, moments of doubt and fear. Sometimes a certain cologne or the sound of ice cubes clinking in a glass would catapult me back to that mansion, that bedroom, those hands. Healing wasn't linear. It came in fits and starts, in tiny victories and occasional setbacks. But I kept moving forward, one day at a time. I dated occasionally cautiously, learning to trust my instincts about men. Some were kind but not right for me. Others I recognized as dangerous from a mile away. My experience with Everett having honed an internal warning system I never ignored. It wasn't until 1972, nearly a decade after my escape, that I met Richard Hampton, a quiet, thoughtful man who taught math at the high school and played guitar at a local coffeehouse on weekends. We were introduced by a mutual friend at a neighborhood potluck, bonding over a shared love of Johnny Cash music and blackberry cobbler. Our courtship was slow, deliberate. I was nearly 24 by then, established in my career at Southern Bell, working on my bachelor's degree in evening classes. Richard respected my independence, never questioned my reluctance to discuss my past, never pushed for more than I was ready to give. On our fifth date, sitting in his car after a movie, he leaned over to kiss me goodnight, and I flinched, a reflex from memories I thought I'd put to rest. He pulled back immediately, concern in his eyes. "I'm sorry," I said, embarrassed, angry at myself for the reaction. "It's not you. It's someone hurt you," he said simply. Not a question, just understanding. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Take all the time you need, Mabel Ruth," he told me, his voice gentle but not pitying. "I'm not going anywhere." 6 months later, I told him everything. The arranged marriage at 14, the year in the Beaumont mansion, the midnight escape. I'd never shared the full story with anyone in Nashville except Mrs. Watson. Speaking it aloud to Richard felt like lancing a wound, painful, but ultimately healing. When I finished, he took my hands in his. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said. "It explains so much about who you are, your strength, your independence, your determination. I admire you even more now." We married in the summer of 1974, a small ceremony in a park with Tommy giving me away and Jessie as my maid of honor. I wore a simple cream dress I'd chosen myself, carried wildflowers picked that morning, and spoke vows I'd written in my own words. Richard's family came from Virginia, mingling easily with my siblings who'd traveled from Alabama. Mrs. Watson sat in the front row, beaming like a proud mother. This time my I do, was a choice freely made with full understanding of its meaning and consequences. This time, marriage was not a prison sentence, but a partnership freely entered with a man who saw me as an equal, who valued my mind and spirit as much as my body. Our daughter Sarah Eleanor was born in 1976. A wanted child conceived in love, arriving into a home prepared to nurture her dreams, whatever they might be. Holding her, I marveled at how different her life would be from mine. She would never know hunger or fear or the feeling of being sold like property. She would grow up believing in her own worth, her own right to choose her path. As she grew, I made sure she knew her value lay not in her appearance or in a man's approval, but in her character, her intelligence, her kindness. I taught her to speak up, to say no, to trust her instincts. I showed her by example that a woman could have a career and a family, that education was precious, that independence was non-negotiable. The years passed quickly, Sarah growing from baby to child to teenager. Richard and I building our life together. My career at Southern Bell advancing until I became one of the few female executives in the company's regional office. We bought a small house with a garden where I grew tomatoes and roses, hosted Thanksgiving dinners for my siblings and their children, saved for retirement and for Sarah's college fund. It wasn't the life 14-year-old Mabel Ruth had imagined while climbing that oak tree in Alabama. It was better, richer, more purposeful, built on choices rather than chance or others' decisions. Today, as I rock on this porch watching seasons change, I look back on that terrified girl who stepped off a Greyhound bus with $60 stolen and a pearl necklace. And I wish I could tell her, you made it. You survived. You built something beautiful from the ashes of what was done to you. My story isn't unique. There were thousands of child brides in America during those years. Girls married off too young to men too old without consent or understanding. Many never escaped. Many spent their lives in silent suffering, their potential never realized, their voices never heard. I tell my story now all these years later, because silence protects only the wrong people, because somewhere there might be another 14-year-old girl trapped in circumstances beyond her control, needing to know that escape is possible, that a different life awaits if she can find the courage to reach for it. If that's you listening to an old woman's memories, know this: you are worth more than what's been done to you. Your life belongs to you alone, and it's never too late to start over. Before I finish sharing this part of my life with you, I'd like to know where you're watching from. It means the world to me that my story might reach places I've never been, touching hearts I'll never meet in person. Please take a moment to share in the comments where you're listening from. It helps this old woman feel connected to a world much larger than my front porch. And if you found something valuable in my journey, something that resonated with your own experiences or helped you understand someone else's, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. Your support ensures that stories like mine, the difficult ones, the necessary ones, continue to be told. Together, we can make sure no one's truth remains hidden in silence. Thank you for listening to Grandma's story. Remember, we never forget the day our dreams are taken away. But with courage and determination, we can build new dreams, better ones that no one can ever steal from us.